right. Greetings. Open up the tube. Waiting for it to beep on YouTube. For now, hello to all my Twitchy friends. We're going to be looking at viewer games together here in a moment. There we go. My phone says it's live on YouTube. And there it is. Perfect. All right. Hey, Jake. It's a new old show. I used to do this show for years and years. And in fact, even when I brought this show onto Chess Dojo 4 years ago, it was really just a reboot and a renaming of a show I did on chess.com 15 years ago, which at that time was called Your Games Analyzed. Submit away, Skibix. You're going to be the first one. I got no games yet. Yeah, you could call it old school content. It's pretty basic, right? I mean, look at games that viewers have played. A pretty simple concept. Probably one of the first 2 chess TV shows I came up with back in the day. Although I'd have to rack my brain to remember the order. So for those who want to send, yeah, absolutely, Jake. Come get a taste. Come get a taste, Jake. All right, so you're saying go find your game on Chess Dojo. That's going to be sweet. It's going to be convenient. Where am I going to find you, Skibix? Amsterdam Science Park. Is your username on here, Skibix? Is that how I'm going to find you? Search users on the scoreboard, and we're going to look for Skibix. Yeah, we found Skibix. That went real easy. I haven't done that before even, and that went real easy. Whoa, getting a huge raid from a president. Président Noir, welcome. The full administration, the administration. Oh, you guys know how to leave a mark. The dojo salutes you back. Graduates are Wednesday and Thursday, I believe. Although I'm discussing that in the background with Jesse on Discord. How we're going to do our schedules. Right now we are doing a new old show. As Jake says, we are doing the Post-Mortem, which is a game in which I analyze a game that's already dead, that one of you's already played. So we're going to go to Skibix's games, and we're going to try and find a game from the whatchamacall. What was the tournament called? Some Amsterdam thing. There were so many administrations here. It was called the Amsterdam Science Park. All right. So, for example, this game here is Ruud Merckx Trophy Zive Amsterdam West. Oh, I go to your files instead of your games. Sure, we'll do that. Files. Skibix's files. Schachvereniging Amsterdam West. Verenigd Amsterdam Schachgenootschap, or Amsterdam Science Park Chess Tournament 2024. That's the right one. Then we've got the games. Nice. That's pretty sweet. Skibix, how long have you been in the Netherlands? Ish. I mean, to the extent to which you want to reveal your life's trajectory to all of us. Just 3 years. That's not that long. Do you speak Dutch? And if so, how long or how easy did it take, or how long was it to learn Dutch? Looks like Black won every game in this tournament. Interesting. Wow, long tournament. Let me see if this is round 9 or round 1. Round 9. Okay, I'm going to go to round 1. It's hard, yeah. 9 rounds, 1 per day. First Dutch rating, 1588. Goals for this tournament, 4.5 out of 9, and get a first FIDE rating. Nice. This round, you played a 1750. I didn't enjoy this game. The guy was super disrespectful. Oh no. Skibix is mad at this guy, folks. Ter Braka Kreen got under Skibix's skin. And I can tell he's like, he wants to prepare for the guy. He's thirsty for revenge. All right. I've started studying the aggressive e4 repertoire, but I haven't reached the Carl Khan yet. Uh-oh. First bad news, right? It's okay. Sometimes we play well when we haven't prepared or studied yet. Let's see how much of this board we can put on top of my face here. I like to show the full analysis if I can. If I can, I'd be down to show this full analysis. Let's take this viewer game analysis here, and put it off to the side, make it smowl. And then we'll take my mowl and put it off to the side as well. Beep. Yo. You don't need the face? Hey, Falcon, you don't even need the face, not at all. I made an effort to peek out at you over here. All right. If we've got the thing set, we can get back into the moves. I love the start so far. I mean, everything about this makes it a great story, right? I mean, the guy was super disrespectful. Even before we see the game, we know that Skibix is thirsting for a rematch. He's studying the aggressive e4 repertoire, but hasn't reached the Caro yet. He's ready with the bishops opening the French and the French easy system. So e6 and e5 starting to get covered. I don't have good results playing the advanced variation. My center crumbles. Yeah. I have to spend more time during analysis figuring out why. And this is a good first step. Absolutely. Bishop f5. e6 and c5 will follow. Good call. Bishop d3. I don't think this was a good move. The invitation to trade LSB is bad for me since I will no longer have a piece that is helpful in a kingside attack. For next tournament, I will study the tall variation from the Dojo repertoire. h4, h5, bishop g5, queen b6, bishop d3, advantage to black. I'm not the sharpest player, and this leaves the d4 pawn hanging, but I trust the Dojo, so I want to learn how to play positions like this. It's a mix of trust and not trust, right? Like black is better after 6 moves, but I'll play it because I want to trust Jesse. Good. All right, back to your game. Bishop d3. You give it a slight dubious. I think it might be slightly playable. It might not be so bad. Here you thought c5 and e6 were good choices. Yeah, plausible. Okay, gives a check. My point is to play c3, but I guess I could play it right away. But I don't like the knight blocking the pawn. Yeah, this is a good move, knight d2. I see nothing wrong with this move. This might be your best move, which is funny. You give it a dubious mark. Actually, let me blaze through the whole game before I decide which parts to talk about. Sorry. Normally, I just play through the game really, really quickly first, folks. But it's been a long time since I've done this show. Normally, I play through the whole game very quickly, so I know which parts of the game I want to focus on. Because if I make comments about every single move, it's disorienting. It's too much. You know, it's not condensed and focused enough for you to really learn from well. So it's important to overview the whole game for myself really quickly and then get into the points that I think are most important. In this case, also, I was carried away with how good Skibix's comments are. I'm just dying to read every single comment, and then, you know, it's all provocative. It's making me have responses and chuckles and so on. But okay, let's just see the game. I'm not even looking at the comments, otherwise I won't be able to help myself. Hey Abdul, welcome. All right, Host of Mahogi is over on Twitch saying, keep the knight on d2. Don't trade the queens. Man, were you guys able to read? I don't know how big it is. Were you able to read some of this dissing that happened here? The guy started laughing and left the board after this move. Then came back later to play knight d3, I guess. Whew. Brutal. Okay. I noticed this game is so painful. Skibix probably doesn't even want to look at it with me or anyone. But props to Skibix for writing up all these notes anyway. And I can see it in a variety of ways. For one thing, Skibix is super, super critical on himself in the notes here. Like, I saw so many dubious marks and question marks in this analysis. Very, very, very harsh. I normally don't give myself that many question marks. I find one or two moves to be really pissed about. But Skibix hates this whole game. So I'm sorry about that, Skibix. I was just trying to get the first round. We can look at a second game of yours if it'll make you feel better. My main thought here overall in this game is that I feel that you got really negative on yourself, even during the game. Obviously afterwards as well. But something about being in a position you weren't familiar with, your opponent being disrespectful, like some combination of whatever was going on that day, you just felt negative about this whole game here pretty much. So I think that because you were rattled during the game, that explains the only really important mistake in the entire game is this rook e1 move, I think. I think that's like the move that matters for the whole game. I imagine you're only slightly worse at this point, even though you've given yourself like 6 question marks, yeah? Yes, President Noir, or Président Noir. You are not supposed to distract your opponent, period. You're not supposed to talk or laugh, make noises, do anything that's distracting, and you can complain to an arbiter about that. Some tournaments have more or less arbiters, But in theory, the rule is consistent as far as I know through all areas of chess. Yeah. So, thank you, Chess Sharks. Shout out, Chess Sharks. And to everybody just joining us from Chess Sharks, hi, I'm David. I'm looking at viewer games right now. So we're just talking about viewer games, and we just have gone over the first game here, and we have some advice for white, which is basically you need to think a little bit about how you want to handle the situation in the future when you face an opponent who is, distracting or rude or something of that sort, right? Some people like playing against people they're friendly with. Some people don't like playing against people they're friendly with. Some people prefer playing strangers. Some people prefer playing against people they don't like. I guess maybe one of the most famous examples was Viktor Korchnoi, who I think said that in order to really play a good game of chess, he had to hate his opponent. So if he got paired against somebody he didn't hate, he would come up with some reason to hate them, to psych himself up before the game. And in this first example here, Skibix did not do well playing against this guy, and it sounds like Skibix, this game had a negative taste, feeling, effect for you for several rounds after this round here, right? So I think there's a question to be asked, what can you best do about a future situation where you get paired with Terbraka or somebody else? How do you want to best handle it for yourself? For me, personally, it would not be helpful to get psyched up and think mean things about the opponent. This is sort of psychological stuff, so there's not just like a best move or a worst move that applies to anybody, right? It has to be the right move for you. For me, I would be best off just forgetting about the opponent as much as I can and just being on the chessboard. And I would just take it as maybe, and if the person's distracting me during the game, which seems likely, it's going to be natural for your brain to start being like, oh, this guy, But I guess what I would prepare in advance is I would say this is a special, focus or concentration challenge for me. Like trying to play a classical game of chess while my toddler's tugging on my arms, or while, somebody pokes my hand with a needle or something like that, right? I would take it as a special concentration challenge, and that way it's framed so when the person starts bothering me, my brain goes into instead of going into all these negative thoughts about the opponent, my brain will go into the challenge thoughts, right? Okay, I'm here. I'm at the moment of the challenge. Can I focus through this? And in fact, just by that, my thoughts are redirected in a pretty good direction. And if I'm prepared in that way, for me, it'll help me keep my focus on just the game. And I won't even really be thinking about the person being annoying because I'm so busy thinking about, oh yeah, I need to pay attention and focus when I get annoyed. That would be what would work best for me. You just have to think in advance what's going to work for you, I think. And not just against this guy, but against other players who bother you for one reason or another in the future. I'm going to grab a second game of yours while hopefully Jake on deck. Oh wait, this is going to be round 8, right? I want to get round 2, which is going to be like here, maybe. Event round 9, huh? Okay, maybe I don't know which round is which. Second game of the tournament. Great. And Jake and others, if you've got a game to send me, let's see, you could whisper it to me, or actually I can see it, I think. That worked. You got bothered by Moobot, but I got your game. I was going to say, folks, you can send it to me on Discord, you can whisper it to me via Twitch, or you can email it to Pruess@gmail.com. I started this game down 40 minutes on the clock. No time to second guess anything. Interesting. nice. Interesting situation. Okay. Okay. So d takes c4 when you need to go b takes c3. This was a key move of the game. And the other key decision of the game was this exchange sack here, right? This was weird to me. Doesn't seem to achieve anything, but it achieves trapping the rook. Rook b2, knight a3, Abdul, right? At this point, there's not really choice, Skibix, right? Like, your rook's been trapped. I think I haven't yet decided if the chess is unsound, but I think the commentary is a little bit unsound because you're giving your opponent question marks and saying it doesn't achieve anything, and then you're giving yourself an exclam. But this is kind of a forcing series of moves. And what your opponent is achieving is they're winning your material. And then it's a separate question whether it works for white or for black. But certainly it's completely reasonable that your opponent tried this. So when you say, I'm not sure if I'm being harsh giving this a mistake, I would say, yeah, I think you're being harsh. You expected knight b6 and you're okay with giving the exchange. Okay. But look, this was weird to me. It doesn't seem to achieve anything. I mean, what black's trying to achieve is winning your material. Now, if you could have played rook a7 and the knight would have just sat here doing nothing, that would be another question. Maybe then it really wouldn't be doing anything. But, you know, you put the question mark on this move, but on this move there's no choice. They played knight b6, the follow-up has to be bishop f4. Similarly, you put the exclam on bishop c5, but the real choice was a move before. Here you have no choice. Your rook's trapped, you should take a pawn for it, right? So I think here is where you have a real choice between rook b8 and rook a7. So here, either rook b8 is an exclam or rook a7 is an exclam, whichever one is the right move. That's the move that should get an exclam. And the move bishop f4, to me, shouldn't have any mark. It's just the result of knight b6, right? So if you think that this is very bad for white or noticeably bad for white, then we could put a question mark on knight b6. right? And say, hey, it's better to just leave these pieces defending this pawn and just sort of get castled and put your rooks in the middle of the board or something like that, right? And if you think that knight b6 was as good a thing as white could do, then you could give it, an interesting mark or something like that, right? If you think it's slightly bad for white, then dubious like you have would be fine. This is awesome. It's even better than just reviewing a game, reviewing an annotated game. Because not only can I teach you something about chess, but I can teach you about how to analyze yourself. It's really good. So yeah, and hopefully you're comfortable with my tone as I'm giving this feedback. I hope I'm not sounding too critical or anything. I just trying to clarify, yeah, just trying to sort of make clear how we talk about what is or isn't a mistake, or how we pick which moves are the real choices here. So yeah, so to me the knight b6 move from white is the move that's quote unquote controversial, and basically we think about it a bit and then decide if we think it's good or bad. And from your side, rook b8 versus rook a7, that's the interesting choice. And the bishop c5 move is just sort of a, well, that's the next move after rook b8. Do you want to try and figure out with me which decision was good or not? We can start with trying to compare evaluations on this position, right? Let's start with that. You have a pawn and a knight against a rook, which means a small sacrifice, small material sacrifice. Of note, you have two center pawns, which are worth a little bit more than other pawns. So that's some of your compensation right there, just having amazing pawns. The other factor for you, but it's kind of related to your center pawns, is that your opponent's pieces aren't very good. And that's going to happen to somebody when there's like a really good center. It's like, this piece doesn't look very good, this piece not that good either. So we don't want to double count the same thing, but we can either say you've got compensation because you've got these valuable center pawns, or we can say you've got compensation because your opponent's pieces are less good than normal, right? We shouldn't count that twice, but it's a good chunk of compensation. My guess would be, Skibix, that the position is close to equal. All those advantages that you have, but still it's against a rook, And white's position isn't like completely trash anywhere other than the lack of a center. Good night, Chess Under Fire. Thanks for popping in with the friendly comment. You do have knight e4, so you are going to get the bishop pair at will. It's true. You've got some pressure. All right. It can be very hard to evaluate something, right? But I'm going to evaluate this as sort of like basically equal. Maybe I'd have a mild preference to play black, but we're talking, a tenth of a pawn or something like that. Very, very small margin, minus 0.1 to minus 0.2, something like that. You probably think that black has a noticeable advantage. Abdul thinks black's crushing, which I think is maybe even more than you were claiming. Crushing would mean more than winning. Stockfish says minus 4.7. Sure. That would be crushing. Are you joking, Grandmaster Smurfette, or have you thrown this position into a fish somehow? I'm proceeding on the assumption that you're joking, but if I'm completely wrong, then you'll have to let me know that I'm a complete idiot. Right. The rooks are good when the position opens. The bishops will want that too. Your bishops already have some open diagonals, and you've got this good plan of putting your bishop on a6 diagonal. So white needs to get a file for the rooks, because your bishops are already good. So, yeah. So there we go. That's a starting point, Skibix. The evaluation is, you're okay here at least. Nobody thinks white's better. I would say the edge for you is tiny. Smurfette says slight edge to you. Abdul says more than winning. White have no play. Well, yeah, that's different. I mean, yeah, white has no play, but will they never have play? Right? Or is there a way for them to gradually engineer play? To me, as white, you kind of want to castle and then break with either c3 or a3 and trade one or two pawns and find a file for your rook and then generate play based on whatever file becomes open for your rook. Okay, so with that evaluation, let's go back and see what we think of this. So is rook b8 giving the exchange a pretty good idea? Yeah, it seems so. Let's ask ourselves briefly what we think of your alternative, though, for comparison. Rook a7. What's white up to there? I guess from white's perspective, I would probably do this plan even before castling. It's just so important to make progress on the queen side to support this pawn and knight. Marvin, there's no simple one-sentence answer to that, right? What we're doing here is a piece of it. You have to analyze your OTB games, like Skibix is doing. The longer answer is check out the Chess Dojo training program from 1800 to 1900, work on that for a year or two, get to 1900, and then check out the program from 1900 to 2000 and spend another year. You probably have to train about 20 hours a week for a year to go up 100 points at your level on average. I mean, you might be more talented or less talented than other 1800s. I don't know that at this point. But it's a good chunk of work to get there. And yeah, we've got the whole list on the site. It sucks to be average. There's some advantages to being average. Like, you can go into a store and the clothes will fit you. You can walk into a training program and the training program will fit you. You won't be either too slow or too fast for it. There's some advantages to being average. By the way, Pony Labyrinth, I've got your game open and you'll be third in line and we'll get to you. We're going to do Skibix, then Jake, and then Pony Labyrinth. Okay, so Skibix is saying this rook on a7 is not shining at all. And Abdul is saying from here, after we trade, we're going to go knight e4 to go after this pawn. And he says it's hard to defend this coconut. Yeah, it's possible you'll go faster than what I say then, Marvin. Yeah, if you're fresh and on the way up. I mean, I can tell you, like, at a basic level, you have to play OTB games and you have to analyze them. It'd be really helpful to have a training partner, somebody who you talk to about your games after you've played them or analyzed them, and who you look at their games. And where you have some, and it can be more than one person, 1, 2, or 3 training partners, where you do some trading back and forth of ideas. And then you need to start doing harder calculation exercises at your level. Past 1800 FIDE, you should be basically done with the kind of patterns that are in Puzzle Rush, right? Like, you should know all 99% of the 2 and 3 move patterns, the basic patterns. And now you have to practice doing 10 to 15 minute calculations that are a little bit more confusing, more game-like, right? And more challenging, where there's not necessarily an answer, or there might be 2 answers. You don't know if there's answers. You just pick a complicated position from a game, so it's not exactly from a tactics book. And you just calculate for a while, write down your calculations, and then play them out on a board and see if they look right. Or if you're doing puzzles, they should be from, a harder collection of tactical puzzles that take you 10, 15 minutes to solve one puzzle, and you get them wrong sometimes. And you should be looking hard for, opponents' resources and defenses to your ideas, and etc., right? So that's got to be a component at this point. As far as ideally they should be stronger, no. I mean, it's always helpful to have somebody stronger than you who's willing to give you ideas. That's awesome to have that resource. But at the basic level, like, a training partner should be somebody close to you in rating with similar training schedule or ambition, right? So if you're 1800, you want somebody close to 1800 who's also trying to improve. If you're working 10 hours a week, maybe somebody who's working between 5 and 15 hours a week. So you guys are on a similar path together, and you can sort of push and help each other along the way. Jake 57689, at the exact same moment as you, Marvin, suggested the Yusupov series for calculation exercises over in the Twitch chat. We've got two streams and 2 chats going at once here. Well, 1 stream into 2 stream receptacles. All right, and with that, Marvin, I have to get back to Skibix here, right? And their game, but if you're interested in my recommendations in more detail, follow Carl's advice and make a Chess Dojo account, chessdojo.club. Okay, so this pawn's under real pressure here on c5. If black can pick it up, then white's game is refuted. So it seems like knight a4 is the only move. And that's kind of good news for black, right? That white played knight b6 and then knight back to a4. Yeah, Liard, I'd gladly play a game with you. Sometime after the Olympiad, right, which ends this week. I haven't really planned my schedule past that, but then, yeah. I'd love to play a training game with you. I haven't played a game in a while. You could. Maybe you should just send me an email. I don't know if Moobot's going to censor you if you put an email address into chat. You could just email me. You may know that I'm Pruess at Gmail. Now, right, how do we make progress from here, right, Skivix? It's like, okay, the signs are nice, but what do we do next? It's my last name at Gmail, Liart. Pruess at gmail.com, I think. Knight b4, queen d4 doesn't do anything. Maybe a5, bishop a6, Skibix. That might be something that's up your alley of how you wanted to play this position. Knight b8 to d7, I see, but it's also... it might walk into a c6 move at some point. And it's not like coordinating your pieces, you know what I mean? Like the pieces that should really be improved are maybe the rooks and the queen and maybe the light squared bishop. These knights and dark squared bishop, those are your pieces that we don't really need to be touching right now. So Abdul says castles, and I say maybe a5. And the thing about a5, bishop a6 is it might improve your bishop and your rook. So that could be kind of cool. So your opponent's going to maybe try c4. Bishop a6. Queen c2. Knight b4. Looks like the queen's getting run off the c4 square here tactically. Because queen c1, there's knight d3. Let's see, where should I put the queen here? Yeah, maybe knight b4 was better than bishop a6. That we don't know for sure either. If white just castles, what happens? Yeah, I guess the game goes on. Black castles. This is interesting and controversial position, Skibix. I don't know how good it is for which player. I mean, at some point, white's got to get their things off this diagonal to untangle. I don't know. I would believe that you're in pretty good position here. You know, there is also this idea of basically going rook b7 and then taking with your bishop and hitting all their pieces, right? I don't even know if white can untangle the pieces fast enough to deal with this idea. And there was also this knight b4, and I didn't know where the queen was going to go. So we would need more exhaustive analysis to prove it, but this looks pretty pleasant for black, this rook a7 position. And we know that if white doesn't, I think a3 was a good move for white here. We know if white doesn't do that, a5, bishop a6 is going to be powerful for you as well. You might get in, M. Norris. You might get in. I'm a little bit slow. But you can send the game, and then I'll use it another day if I don't get to it today. Or you could just stay queued up and see if I get to you. Okay, so a very, very interesting position here for the game, right? You like your position. Your opponent goes for this knight b6 thing. I guess what I'm thinking is... Awesome. You're welcome, Carl. That's sweet. Have a great day. I think you might be right that knight b6 is dubious. Not like terrible dubious, but like dubious, as you said. You know, because white's not really losing with knight b6, but it's not helping them much. And from what we've looked at so far, I think that maybe what white should be doing is a3 and castles, but without spending time on the knight. Okay, that's my take on it, which isn't guaranteed to be right, but at least, Skibix, you see my approach to the same position as you and my thoughts on it, right? If knight b6 is dubious, then white's entire plan makes no sense, opines Michael. f. Probably they should have moved the knight somewhere else instead of a4. Well, when the move b4 came, they didn't have a lot of good moves for the knight, but yeah, potentially they could have retreated the knight on a different route. Possible, yeah. I do want to emphasize that even though knight a4 is kind of committal and off to the side, and even though d4 hung a pawn, we weren't even saying that white was losing here. You know, it's just a little bit unpleasant. I think just because you can't play knight b6 doesn't mean that your whole position for white can't make sense. Sometimes you need to keep c5 strong for a while, and only later when you're really ready for it does knight b6 come. It could be an example of knight b6 being premature rather than it being an idea that we should reject out of hand, right? So I think it's important that we understand that black's doing well, but we also understand that white's not dead yet. Yeah. I think we have to... It's important in chess to recognize when you're better, but also to recognize when like you're better but not winning, right? And you don't want to get too excited. You want to just keep pressure, basically, right? And Abdul thinks black might be able to crush a3 with just e5, ignoring. Which, actually... Okay, you can't play e5 here because of knight d5. e4, knight f6, check. Okay, I was wondering, can we just play e5, let white take the rook, and play e4 and win? Maybe, but white has knight d5. That refutes this line, right? So e5 would be dubious, or just a mistake. Knight b6, rook a7, a3. I mean, here again. Oh, the knight b6 stops e5 always. Interesting. And here, if we go a3, Abdul wants to go e5 and just tear us apart. Ay, ay, ay. Gotcha, Skibex. Yeah, you have a sense of what your own strengths and weaknesses are there. We can also play it that way, Fisher Seb. We can play c4. The reason I was playing a3 was to trade the a pawn first and still have the c pawn that can get through to c4 later. But yes, you can play c4, which pressures d5, and black takes it. And then, I don't know, you just put your knight back in the center and life goes on. Or move the queen over. Protect this pawn some more, still play for knight b6. That looks right. Knight e4, queen c2. Yeah. Okay. So knight b6 maybe a little bit dubious. And I think honestly your choice between rook b8 or rook a7, they both look slightly better for black, so I don't have a very strong preference between those two moves, Skibex. And I think that's like as close as I can get to answering this controversial part of this game. The evaluations are not obvious enough, or the evaluations are, uncertain enough that it's not easy to be sure of which moves are best, which moves are, mistakes or slightly dubious or strong moves, because it's so hard to evaluate. Rook b8 entices bishop f4, yes, but what do you do if white just castled, right? So you give castles, c3 takes. And you think black's clearly better. Yeah, I don't think white's too dead yet. Okay, so let's go to the second important moment in this game. Which is this one here. I got fancy. I played this way too fast. I was thrilled by the idea of c3, discovering an attack. Okay, so you were excited by the idea of pawn takes, queen moves somewhere, and then you play this fancy c3 move, and your bishops are just on fire. I think part of it is you had a particular dream for the bishops, right? You had a narrative of the game, which was that your bishops were great, and then you found a variation that completed your narrative. You see what I mean? All right, this lines up. Like a lot of times when we have calculation mistakes, folks, it's because of our strategic biases, right? Like we expect something to work or we expect something to not work. And based on that, we then see a variation that does or doesn't work. And I think that may be a little bit what was going on here for you, Skibix. You had a narrative and a concept of the game, which was these bishops are sick. And then you came up with a line where you're like, yep, these bishops are sick. You more or less blitzed it. You're saying, so you barely even call it a calculation mistake because you feel like you didn't even calculate. But you at least saw the idea of c3, right? Even if you didn't calculate the, whatchamacall. Even if you didn't really calculate the consequences, just your chess visualization, you'd picked up an idea, right? And it was an idea which appealed to you and matched your idea of the game so well that you didn't bother checking it, right? There was something about the idea that made you feel like, and I don't even need to check that. This happens to me all the time, right? I've got something that just makes so much sense that I say, yeah, I'm going to go for, I'm going to go for it. It's hard to sit on your hand. It just feels like the right move. For me, very often, it'll be in the opening, something's really complicated, and then suddenly I see a way to develop my last piece, and it like hits 3 or 4 important squares on the board, and I will play that move without checking if there were any important tactics for the pieces that were already developed. You know what I mean? Like I'm just so convinced that if I can bring out my last piece and hit all these squares, surely it's right. Rook AE1. That's the kind of move, with my personal biases, that's an example of the kind of move that I just kind of slam out there. And sometimes, it's missing a direct win that you already had with your pieces that were in position. I spent so long teaching people not to just keep moving their pretty pieces, not to try to win with an attack with just 2 or 3 pieces. But there are positions where 2 or 3 pieces against all strategic odds can just, deliver a winning tactic or attack. And sometimes I personally will miss it because my bias is just bring out the last piece. The one thing you calculated was knight d7. Okay, so you're calculating a little bitty bit. All right. So the reason I try and psychoanalyze this mistake for you, Skibix, and everyone else, the reason why I try to psychoanalyze all my own mistakes in the same way is I'm always trying to put together this kind of profile, this pattern of myself, right? And for that, I need to know, why am I making certain mistakes? What are the mistakes that I repeat, etc., right? So I think here, yes, you played too fast. That's a piece of it. And the other part is like you kind of relaxed into this move because it met everything you expected, right? It gave you what you thought you wanted. And this also applies to like trapping and tricking people, right? If you can see a problem with a line and you know that that line is exactly what they're looking for and what they want to do, then that's the kind of line where you can trap them, right? Or in TV shows with like spies or whatever, clever people tricking other people, right? Heists or whatever. They're tricking people based on what they know those people want, right? That's how you scam or fraud or trick people, right? They think that things are going to go this way, and so you play into that. Right, and of course, yeah, if you stop and think more carefully, pawn takes c3 is also opening up your bishops, but it's more devastating because your opponent can't block the c4 square at all. You still keep this pawn, and that's the important thing. You're trying to win this light square diagonal. Your opponent's knight is covering light squares. This diagonal has already been conceded, the dark square diagonal. So to win control of this diagonal, if you can keep this pawn, that's better, right? Because that pawn is covering c4. Now you win control of that diagonal. All right, and you give a variation here, which I think is completely accurate. This was the way to go. Black is now clearly winning. Even trading the queens with queen c6, we will take on b2. Very nice. Oh, you saw the way to save the two pieces. Good job. Bishop takes knight, drops the queen. But you saw that you get a second pawn and things are going very, very well. So, very nice. Another day, Marcus Carlson. I'm sure I won't be able to get to you today. Sorry. I've got a couple games in the bag here. All right, so now good work on the analysis here, Skibix. You've got like the key variation here. You mentioned that you played fast. You gave me the clue with how you were thrilled with this c3 move, which you then did get to play. Hurrah, hurrah. I think we figured out what you did, why you did it, what to look for differently in the future, right? Always one remedy to playing quickly because like things are going the way you want them is to have some kind of always take winning moves seriously, always double check and invest more time on like the key tactical move of a game than on random strategic choices. So if you've got time on the clock and you're looking at winning the game, you just automatically go into a mode of doing some calculating. You never just say like, yep, this probably wins. So Abdul says the variation is not actually accurate. Queen c3, bishop f1, and then knight d7. Oh, yeah. Very, very nice. So here the line's going to have to continue, right? You're going to take, check, king here, check, king here, here. And now you've got the same two-pawn advantages that you wanted before. Yeah, exactly, Skibix. You have bishop f2. You get the exact same balance that you had, and you are winning. It's correct. Yeah, I'm an IM, Marcus. Yeah, it's a nice detail to add to the analysis, Skibix, right? Like this helps us practice our calculation. Like Jesse always says, when are you doing your tactics? Well, part of it is just when you're analyzing your own games, right? You're calculating some little variations. Let me get the sun out of my eyes. So that's a nice little variation here, right? What do we do about knight d7? Bishop f2, queen b5. Very nice. You can't see that far yet, but it's good to force yourself. Yeah, so that's exactly what you're doing when you're analyzing your games. You get to play out the moves, right? So you can go further than you did during the game, and then we're just looking for outs for the opponent. Queen c6, knight d7, just practicing calculating some extra moves by playing them out. Yeah. Super. All right. Let's take Jake's game. All right. Here we've got Jake with white. It's a game from 2024. Time usage. You guys aren't looking at it right now, but I am. We can see that white used a lot of time and then played a little faster at the very end of the game, whereas black completely ran out of time at the end of the game. White's time usage looks good. Oh, you're welcome, Skivix. You are welcome. And Pony Labyrinth, if you're around, you're up. You're up next. I'm going to do a quick playthrough, and then I'll get back to some key moments.
Appreciates the content.
Interesting. One day, 3 rounds? That's a lot. Hey, Alex. Liart, E3-4 plan is less good with lots of pieces traded. It leads to more pawn islands, but a pawn center that can keep the opponent's pieces out of good squares in the center. So you need your opponent to have multiple minor pieces to suffer, normally, with the E4 plan. The king had to come back anyway. You guys reading this funny story on the side? My opponent checked his watch and made a startled face, causing me to assume it was later than he anticipated. Like, oh shoot, I gotta go. I can't finish the game. At this point, the only other players who could have caught us had drawn their games, ensuring that a draw would result in us tying for first in the tournament and sharing the prize money. I offered a draw, which my opponent declined. Like, what? It wins the tournament for him, and he's making this face like, oh shoot, I gotta go. And then he keeps playing. Funny. Very funny. You guys do a great job with the comments. Comments should be fun to read, I think. I mean, they don't have to be, but why not? Might as well. Might as well be fun. Uh-oh. Wow. Well, we should show Jesse that you analyzed the end game, not just the middle game. Okay. All right. So, Jake, there's two things that happen in this game, I think, right? No, maybe three things. Number one, and most obvious, you've already pointed it out. Actually, you pointed out two of the three things, at least. You pointed out all three of the things. Okay, there's three main things that happen. I think you have a sense of all three of them already, but anyway, that's what we've got to talk about, so we'll talk about them. Okay. One thing is, you were gassed out, right? And that's what I saw immediately in the time graph, right? Was that you used about the same amount of time as your opponent through move 45, 46, 47. And then you were just gassed out. And so you were just playing the best you could at the end, but you didn't have the energy to fight through. You would start looking at a variation and your head would say, I can't do it. And you'd say, fine, we don't have to look through this variation. We can just play an intuitive move or an I hope this is the right move. I don't think that cost you in this particular game. Like, you still held it together, right? But there was more of a chance that you would make a mistake because you were in that state. Okay, that's fine. You recognize it. Everybody's got their limits, and it was the third classical game in a day, right? So it's pretty normal. You can see that your opponent, and I don't know how old or young or what they were, but you can see that your opponent was dead set on winning this game. Like, they had that extra juice because they were also playing at the end of the third game, and they'd already clinched the tournament, and they were still striving for something more, right? So that's an advantage your opponent has that wasn't enough for them to outplay you this time, but your opponent had that final gear, to work till the last second and the last pawn, looking for just any possible way to win the game, which is, I think, admirable. Whether or not they won because of it this time, they'll probably win plenty of games because of that. If they've got the energy to grind a long end game in the third game of a day again and again, they're going to find some people whose brains are going to fall out against them. They're going to win some extra half points now and then. It's only fair. Then the other thing is you transpose into this pawn structure that but a bad version of it. Right? And then as soon as you do, you're like, oh yeah, my experience with this pawn structure tells me it's bad. Okay, and then I think you were like a little bit mad at yourself about it because you gave black a full clear advantage, which is a bit much for this position. I would say equal plus. I'm not going to argue with you about it. I'm just giving you my thought process, right, for you to compare as you will. For the exact same factor as you, this bishop on b2 is bad in this structure. If it were on g3 or h4 or g5, the game would be an absolutely standard opening. And it would be either equal or sometimes a tiny pull for white, but normally pretty much equal, since black pieces all got to really good squares and no concessions. The bishop on b2 is a problem, but there should be definitely still ways to mitigate it. Clear advantage, I use clear advantage to say that you don't know if the position is a win or a draw with best play. So I use decisive advantage to mean that with best play, a certain side's winning. I use slight advantage to say with best play, the game would eventually be a draw, even though we know which side looks better. And I use clear advantage to say the advantage is somewhere in that range where we can't tell if it's winning or not. So it's going to be a pretty significant advantage, right? It's going to be like between 0.5 and 1.1 or something like that. Now, that might be the old evaluations that don't mean anything to you nowadays. My point is, to really be winning, you need like a slightly good version of being up a pawn, right? And when you have a positional advantage that's pretty significant and more than half a pawn, you don't know if that's enough that it might ultimately be winning or that it can be contained. So for me, the clear advantage is kind of starts at 0.5 or 0.6 and goes to about 1.1, but those are, engine evaluations from some years back when they didn't look 30 moves ahead and say, aha, it's +7. Okay. Right, so you were more depressed OTB and now you're more calm. So if you think 0.8, then you've put the right evaluation from my perspective with the clear advantage. To me, it feels more salvageable than that, rightly or wrongly. I would still think you should be able to hold on. Although, yeah, I mean, you do sort of need a piece trade at some point to help your king side balance of forces. Okay, it's obviously a bit unpleasant, and I have some experience with this structure just like you. Often you get these positions with the bishop on d2 out of the Nimzo, right? If white plays c takes d, not at the right time in a Nimzo, and then black doesn't trade the knight and just brings the bishop back to any of these three squares. I don't know if you have a ton of experience playing against the Nimzo, but maybe you are a d4 player, it seems. So this can happen in the Nimzo, and it's often a slight advantage for black when white slips like that and doesn't make a piece trade. Okay, but yeah, obviously it's like a weird decision to say I'm going to go into this pawn structure I know, but not use your knowledge of the pawn structure to decide if you should or shouldn't go into it. You're a 3 knight f3. Yeah, I was thinking you even played knight f3 on move 2 in this game, and against bishop g4 you didn't play the more aggressive c4 or e4 kind of moves. So I was thinking maybe you're not somebody who actually plays into the Nimzo. Just a little bit more, just a little more conservative in your opening setups, less confrontational, I guess, in your opening tastes. I don't want to say it with any kind of a negative connotation, right, Jake? But yeah, we're talking in that direction. We're talking in the direction of cowardice. But not like bad cowardice, just like it's a matter of taste. Some people grab everything they can and other people defend what they have. Yeah. We were looking at a really cool game a couple days ago. I think it was this one, between Never Enough and Viral Stigma. And Never Enough was just like a technical player, and they were just always comfortable to maintain a certain advantage that was simple and clear to them. And they didn't play a lot of maximalist moves, but they're just choices, like they have positions where when black plays c5, super maximalists are going to play BC, DC, D5, right? Trying to grab the most center, get the most everything. But this player is just comfortable playing moves like A3. Oh, sorry, I switched boards and you guys can't see what I'm talking about now. Oh, that example became really useless then. Anyway, hopefully you know what I'm saying. It's not necessarily a bad thing to have certain tastes one way or another, right? But somebody who has defensive tastes, there are situations where it can cost them, and somebody who has aggressive tastes, there are situations where it can cost them. So the better a player gets, the less and less you see their taste like really deciding their moves, and it's first they're deciding what they think the best move is, and only when it's really the moves are very close to equal, then they're indulging in their taste. Okay. So yeah, so obviously the point of having familiarity with a structure is to know when you have a good or bad version of that structure and make your choices based on that. So when you have experience with multiple structures like IQP, hanging pawn, Carlsbad, for example, right? Or let's say another structure, the E4, DE4, Knight E4 structure. Okay, which is kind of the Queen's Gambit or Catalan has been conceded by black structure, I would say. When you've got experience with those structures, where it really becomes valuable is when you then make choices about which structure you play towards because of some kind of comparative thinking, right? That tells you this is a good version, this is a bad version, etc. So in general, I think, Jake, bishop b2 lines, people don't really trade as much. I think in bishop b2 lines, there are two things they try to do. One is e4. Let me try and get rid of all this. It's overly arrowed now. I think one is to play e4 and the other is to plop a knight on e5. I think those are the two main ways that people want to play when they've got the bishop on b2. In other words, they want to keep the space from this c pawn, usually. The bishop backing up the e5 square allows you to plunk a knight on e5 sometimes, so that's taking advantage of the strength of the bishop. And e4 positions are a bit better with the bishop here because it's harder for your opponent to play c5 or e5 well. So I think those would be the plans that you should try to go for at this point. Now, right now, if you play e4, it looks like you lose a pawn, and if you play knight e5, it looks like you lose a pawn. So you would have to aim towards whichever one you wanted to play, right? So, for example, you could play queen c2. Trying to play e4, right? Or you could move this knight, trying to plop knight e5. And if neither of those plans is really happening just yet, you can also just develop your queen and your rooks to the center squares and wait for a while. By the way, I don't know about your experience, but my experience would say that black's already probably equal because they've got this semi-Slav position with the bishop outside the pawn chain. Their position looks pretty pristine. Sometimes if you play sort of the more safe moves in the opening, the position will be equal by move 10, right? That's pretty common. And that shouldn't be a surprise to you, I would guess. So you should be comfortable sometimes playing the position as if your opponent has equality, right? So if they have equality, sometimes, you just play queen d2, rook a d1, rook f e1. You don't try to prove an advantage or ram through some special plan, right? You just finish development and put your pieces on sensible squares. Okay? So that's the second important thing in this game. And then the third thing that I really noticed was that you weren't sure how to do this F3 or F4 or what to do here. By here, if you think black was better, you've actually you've reduced black's advantage a bit, I think, with the trade of the dark squared bishop, the light squared bishop. Your king's just not in as big a danger. Nothing too bad has happened. Now it's more like, what are the plans for moving around in circles in an equalish position against a good opponent, right? And I think you got the most confused a few moves later around the F4 move. So we could advance to there if we want. But let me just read your comment about F3 as well, since there's a comment. At this point, I had assumed my position was quite bad. With the B4 square a major weakness and no clear point of counterplay, I assumed it would be a slow death. The F3 pushes the common motif in this pawn structure, allows white to prepare E4. In this case, it proves problematic as black already has significant central control. If white is unable to push E4, the pawn becomes a significant weakness on E3. Your whole outlook is a bit negative, like Skibix when he got BM'd. You give yourself a fair number of dubious and question mark moves, and I think you're always evaluating the position as being worse than it actually is. Or I'm just too optimistic and we're just comparing you and me, and that's the gap we're seeing. Maybe you're realistic. But I find your evaluations to be generally pretty pessimistic. I think by here, if you don't play F3, you're saying because black has the B4 square, you're going to slowly die? That seems like a very strong statement. I mean, black needs to build up strength somewhere and overwhelm you, or target, some two different weaknesses in your camp or something like that. Just because they've got one outpost square for one of their pieces doesn't mean that they have an eventual win dialed in. What have you been up to here? Knight D2 trades. Yeah. That makes sense, Skibix. Very much influenced by the game in mind, or by the game that's like in front of you at the moment, right? That makes sense. I don't think your position's so bad, Jake. I'm thinking like maybe you should put a knight on D3 and look at E5 and C5 and your opponent's B4 square. So, maybe knight F3, just looking to plop it on E5, en route to D3 maybe. Yeah, I mean, so the other thing I want to say is like the F3 plan, Jake, F3 and E4. In my experience, that plan works if your opponent has some tangled up minor pieces that don't have enough breathing room. Here, F3, E4, even if black allowed it, I don't think it's going to be particularly good. I mean, I don't think it's going to be terrible, but I don't think it's going to be great. And I think you're putting a dubious move on F3, partly because in hindsight you think the plan wasn't very powerful. But in the game, I think you chose the plan partly because of that pessimistic sense, right? It's like a mild version of desperation, right? Some people, when they're desperate, they sack a piece or something like that, right? You were feeling a little strategically desperate and wanted to shake things up by finding a plan for yourself at all costs. You wanted a real plan. Some counterplay in case your opponent started building up on the B4 square. So, I think in that case, we see maybe the pessimism hurting you a little bit, right? If it's making you play F3, E4 here, instead of simple move like this. Also, I noticed you've never brought the rooks out yet, which often happens. Although I do like that you traded those bishops. Right. Okay, so I have to tell you about the most important plan in all of chess, Jake. Yeah, so you knew two plans, the minority attack and the F3, E4 plan, right? But I have to tell you about the most important plan in all of chess, and it exists in every single position. It's not always the best plan, but in every position, it's one of your options. So you can use this plan in the King's Indian. You can use this plan in the Queen's Gambit. You can use this plan in the French defense, okay? Everywhere. The plan is do nothing. That's perhaps the most commonly used plan in all of chess at Grandmaster level. Yeah, we could make a great chessable course out of this. It's very important to remember that you always have that option. You always have the option of not playing some kind of special plan. It doesn't mean you absolutely do nothing, right? It's just we're not playing a grand plan. You can still do things like put your rook on the semi-open file where it's going to be most useful later on, right? It can still be small little improvements of one piece here or there. But you don't need a grand plan like this is my breakthrough or this is my that, right? The grand plans, anyone who wants to, if you want to force through a win or prosecute an advantage, you maybe need a grand plan or some kind of a plan, right? And sometimes if your opponent has a winning plan, you need to use a plan because you need counterplay to avert them winning, right? So if you were right that your opponent could eventually beat you because of the b4 square, then you would need a plan, and you'd be right to look for what plans do I know of? Is there any plan that does something against it, right? This is another plan, f4, knight f3, knight e5, which I think you actually do know about unless you just invented it for yourself 10 moves later. So you do need a plan if you're trying to push through a win and your opponent is not committing suicide. Sometimes even when you have the advantage, you just play some simple moves and let your opponent do a bad plan, right? But if your opponent's solid and they're holding still, you need a plan to prosecute an advantage and win, and you need a plan if you're worse and your opponent has a clear winning plan. So you can create some counterplay and make it harder for them. But there are many situations where if you're worse, your best plan is to more or less, hold still and obviously make small little adjustments here and there as you need to and defend things as they come up. Yeah, that's the important plan. So in the Carlsbad structure, the minority attack and the f3, e4 plan and the sit plan, Jake, right? So the sit plan is, you put a rook on c1 so that it's harder for them to advance on the queen side if they ever wanted to. It could coordinate well with putting a knight on c5 or e5 at some point. This rook could go to e1 to dissuade sacrifices, or sometimes it goes to d1 to support knight e5, knight c5 kind of moves. Okay? So that gives you a third plan, and the fourth plan is the Stonewall plan. That's actually a plan in the Carlsbad as well. So that gives you a fourth plan. I'll give you a fifth plan. You can go into an IQP. This plan is used most often if your opponent's played b6, so their c6 pawn will be weak just like your d pawn. But this can also be a desperation plan. This can be an aggressive plan if you're ahead in development, which is not the case here. And it can be a desperation plan if you're going to get overrun on the king side unless you gain some space. And these positions like this are often about equal, sometimes slightly worse for one side or the other. But this is definitely an option as well. Having IQP feels worse than being down a pawn? Well, you can always stop defending the IQP. And you'll be down a pawn. Hooray. Ish. Here I think b6 does bad things to that knight. Although weirdly, knight a6 might be a draw because of the threat of knight c7. But even if you can't go knight c5, you could go rook e1 first. And the game will go on. Right? So that's another plan for the Carlsbad structure. There's definitely like a plan where they go rook c1, knight a4, knight c5, but you don't have that with the pawn on a4 here. But that's another very, very minor plan, a very piano plan. So now you've got some more strings to your bow for future Carlsbad structure games. I assume you're going to get a fair number of Carlsbad structures in your life. Another plan is f3, g4, h4, and a kingside demonstration with the e3 and f3 pawns just holding still and defending from behind. Not a very common plan, but it does exist. Nice, you got another trade-off. Queen d3. Looks like you could just play knight g3 here. You could just keep offering trades every time they put their piece on a good square. You're a bit worse because black has the queen on this nice weak square, as you pointed out, but so far you're holding everything together. It's not a decisive disadvantage there. Knight d2 seems better than knight g3. Yeah, knight g3 is walking into where black owns all the squares. Knight d2 could allow you to play e4 and potentially trade knights if you have to, or play knight f3 to e5 faster. Yeah, so you're right on that. You're right on the money on that. You made some little slips in the game, but it seems like you understood and corrected them in your analysis quite well. So, good job. I hope I've said something useful for you. Yeah, just knowing that you have the nothing plan as an option when you're defending. I think that's going to be useful. And we're going to move on to the Pony Labyrinth. Yeah, I can see you put in a lot of time on the analysis, Jake. It makes sense. You definitely figured out a lot and got pretty deep into it. All right. So we've got two 1200s playing what looks like a 60-minute game. The time has been registered here. Black used 45 out of 60 minutes, which is great. White used 30 out of 60 minutes. So white maybe played a little quickly. Yeah, super. Let's have a look. Queen's Gambit, Slav. Normally black plays knight f6 before taking that pawn, right? D takes c4. White played e4, not spending a move on a4, so black hangs onto the pawn, yeah. We're losing tempo with the queen. Ooh. Oh, the queen! The queen did work. Bravo to the queen. Wow, fancy. Found bishop f7 in analysis later. Yeah, this is tremendously scary. Makes sense that you were worried here. Oh, now the rook's hit. Ouch. No! Oh, and still got it the next move. Nice. Beautiful. Okay. So, Pony Labyrinth. A couple exciting moments in this game. Definitely this is like a huge moment. This tactical thing. And you'd just been dying to castle so that you wouldn't lose your queen. And finally you had a chance to take the opponent's queen and solve your problems at the same time. So that's kind of funny. And it makes sense that that's when you were not looking for it. You were just looking to defend your queen, not take theirs. That's really typical for when we make mistakes, all of us, period, right? When we're looking and expecting one thing or trying to do one thing and something surprising happens and we don't notice it because we're following what we were trying to do. Okay. Now, that said, I think here, instead of queen b7, your opponent could have won your queen by moving the bishop. I don't know if it should go to f4 or g5 or c5 or d4, but something like this should win the queen. And I think that you didn't notice during the game or in the analysis afterwards. You noticed that you were having a hard time here, so that was good. White obviously has some discovered attack threats. Rook e1 is such a normal developing move that you had not anticipated it. You were focused on knight g4, bishop d6, knight g4. Aggressive, yeah. Yeah, you played a little bit the opposite of Jake from that previous game, right? You're very confident and aggressive in what you're going after in the opening and trying to take advantages and punish your opponent, but not taking enough into account the question of, is your position strong enough to do what you want to do, right? Yeah. So here already, one should be a little bit scared as black because the E file is open and white is castled and black is not. So, I mean, this is maybe the next level, but hopefully this game is a first lesson in that direction. But the next level for you, I think, would be at this point here, anticipating the danger to your king and going into, oh my gosh, I need to get castled mode, right? You went into, oh my gosh, I need to get castled mode one move later. It's a difference, it's a gap, right? But we need your alarm system to go off one move sooner. The exact system that caused you to, in this position, not take the queen and castle, right? So it shows that you have that system. You had that alarm, like, I just have to get castled, right? So I want you to notice the, oh my gosh, I probably need to get castled right here after white castles. This is the moment to notice it and come up with something. Excuse me. And funnily enough, you mentioned a move castling queenside, which you rejected as being kind of too insane, but you thought of it. And I think that might even have been the best thing you had to do, right? Knight d7, rook fe1, and now castles. It says you considered it, but there's no variation for it yet. So castles queenside. That gets your king off of this direction, so you're not going to lose your queen. Your opponent's got two aggressive moves here in bishop g5 and bishop c5. Bishop g5, you can at least save your queen, but you might even save your rook like this. Queen f5, and they can't take the rook. I guess they could go g4. which has its own risks. Alternatively, you could go here, and then there's no g4. You're eyeing the knight and the pawn. They can't play rook d1 because of your outpost. I mean, they can still do scary things like knight c4, and we haven't finished development. I'll admit I don't feel comfortable as long as I haven't developed, but f6 looks good. By the way, my instincts are that you're in grave danger that you're getting killed here. I would rather not have the extra pawn, but have my development finished at this point. Which I could be wrong about, but I'm just saying, I find f6 and it looks like it wins for you, but I'm surprised. I'm actually not expecting the tactics to work out for you at this point. I'm expecting some kind of rook d1, rook d7, knight b6. I'm expecting something bad's about to happen to you. And playing this move and not developing these pieces, I'm terrified. So me personally, I feel like you're in a scary situation at this point. And I know at this point you were still feeling very confident. You're like, I played an in-between move. I won a pawn. I'm so cool. I know you were thinking great things about yourself, Pony, which is cool. Which is cool. But I'm seeing some danger here. Personally, how do I feel about this pawn grab? How well does this go for you? Knight f6, knight d2. That's a nice move from the opponent. But you back up and you still stay ahead of pawn. Maybe this move is too much. What happens if you just recapture? One of the scariest moves might be queen f3, attacking along this way, right? There's also a simple move where they trade and then castle rook e1 like in the game. But let's look at the scariest move first. They go here. I guess I have to play f5. I don't see anything else to do. Folks, feel free to help me on the calculating if you see better. Shout it out. But f5 to not lose anything. Castles, bishop e7. I'm just meekly trying to castle, you know. That's all I'm trying to do is castle. So I think here I've held it together for you. We've survived rook e1 with the f5 move. Now this makes me want to try this for white. Knight e4, queen e4, simple castle. Bishop e7, rook e1, castles, and tactico. Now all your stuff is attacked. And I don't see a way to save it all. I think you have to give up the queen for the two pieces, the rook and bishop. Knight e4, queen e4, castles. Bishop e7, rook e1. Ay, ay, ay. Queen f5. Bishop takes, queen takes, rook c1. This is more advanced tactically, Pony, but if I show you a few of these patterns, I think that you can recognize what I'm cooking up as white here. That I'm really doing some scary things to black. Have I sacked two pieces somehow as white? When did I sack two pieces? I thought I sacked one. I've been down a piece since b5. Oh. Well, that's why you're so far behind in development. You took a whole piece. And that gives you some more latitude to survive. For example, you can trade in the queen in this first variation I gave you. This is what you should do, I believe. First blush is you should do this. Because you got more than enough pieces to eventually beat the queen. and we've avoided a disaster. Did you see when I tried to defend this? And rook c1 was coming. And if you move the queen, rook c8 is checkmate. I guess, again, you have enough material to just castle, takes, but queen d5 wins for white. We don't yet have the pieces developed. Yeah. All right. Well, let me just ask you a question, Pony Labyrinth. At this point in the game, you're up a full piece, and you take the center pawn. What if you just played bishop e7 here because you were up a piece? Like, basically on the principle you don't need to be up more than a piece to later win the game. What do you think of just getting castled at this point here? Or maybe trade on c4. I mean, because, you know, you're up a piece and it's a trade and the pieces are looking at each other. So you trade. I don't know if they even take this way. And this pawn's completely hanging, and I just do this move. Am I allowing too much with e5? I think they'll castle because of queen g2. It's hard not to take the pawn now, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, we don't have to put our queen on the file. We take the pawn, getting castled. You've got f5. Since I had an extra piece, I could get something going. Yeah. I mean, the thing is, even though you have an extra piece, you're a tempo behind in development, right? So that's something that you have to be working towards finishing development. Whether or not you were up a piece, I would tell you to probably try to develop more than get something going. Getting something going is something that you do if your opponent's played some terrible move, or if you're ahead in development. But getting something going is very rarely something you do when you're behind in development. I think that's fair to say. Right? So if your opponent's got 3 minor pieces out, and you've got 2, then in general, it's not bad to have your eye open for a tactical blunder from your opponent. That's what won you the trapped piece earlier, right? Which was the first step towards you winning this game. But your first thought is not to get something going when you're behind in development. It's to catch up in development. Catch up in development, then either get ahead in development or have your opponent make some kind of mistake or leave some kind of weakness. And then get something going is a later stage. With exceptions, like with most things in chess, but I think it's true often enough to be useful. The person who has more development is more likely to be the person who should be trying to get something going. F5 is probably good too. I don't know where you mean F5, Pony. Yeah. Okay, so I think those are the 2 good lessons from this game, very related, Pony Labyrinth. One is this idea of, should you be getting something going when your opponent's ahead in development? You should be catching up in development. And then that can also hopefully help you to see this rookie 1 danger coming a little bit sooner. If you're aware, my opponent's ahead in development, guess what? They're trying to get something going, right? They're trying to get something going. And once they played rookie 1, they had it going. And now, even though you're up a piece, the game becomes very interesting and complicated, right? It becomes a game again, which is fun from one perspective, but the person who is winning is the one person who disagrees. Tunnel vision, yeah. I think everybody gets some version of tunnel vision at almost every level based on what plans they know and what biases they have. In some regards, Pony, because I've been playing so long, I have even more pronounced biases than you in some ways, and things that I'm just like locked in my way of doing things, right? So I can have worse tunnel vision sometimes, but I also have had enough experience and have seen enough variety that there's a part of me that's also saying like, well, hang on, there can always be, these surprises or these other options. So it can kind of go a little bit of both ways. But I think the key thing here is this idea of development. If you understand that you want a development lead to get something going, or that if your opponent has a development lead, they might be trying to get something going, that can help you with calibrating when to play aggressively and when to play defensively, or at least be on the lookout for your opponent's options so that you treat them respectfully. I think it's kind of funny that in this position you considered this castle's queenside move, and it might have been a really good move. It was too insane looking to play, is what the original commentary said, right? I actually considered it, but it was too insane looking to play. And David's saying like, well, maybe castling is not the most insane thing. All right. Any questions for me, Pony, before I kill the show and go pick up my kids from school? Oh, that water's good. I don't think I drank enough after the gym. And Carl even told me I need to drink a lot of water. Carl gave me a lot of advice. One thing Carl said was drink a lot of water. Yeah. And Pony, you did take away that that's not like 100% rule, right? It's a general indication of who's more likely to have successful attacks, right? The person with more pieces that are out and fighting. But I don't want to box you into like I don't want to box you into too prescribed a thinking, right? It's not like the person who's behind in development is never going to land a punch, but they might win like 1 out of 8 or 9 fights. So if you're initiating a fight when you're behind in development, you'd have to check extra, I guess. And if you're ahead in development and somebody starts a fight with you, your first instinct would be, I've got some way to refute this person, right? Or if you're playing a game and you notice your opponent's getting quite a bit ahead in development, you can have an alarm bell going off like, uh-oh, if this guy starts a fight, like, it could be bad for me. Or, uh-oh, this guy's ahead a couple moves in development. They might be looking for a fight. What might they have in mind, right? So we start having that kind of warning alert going off when we're behind in development to watch out for options for the opponent, right? And that's a general learning process, taking our opponents into account, right? Asking ourselves what they want to do and what their ideas are. It's something that takes time, but that could be a first step, right? Just sort of based on the factors you see in the position, calibrating for, who might be on the attack next, can help as an alert system or a warning system. You won a piece, so you're ahead, yeah. But what was actually on the board was that you're behind, yeah. So you've got one more piece than your opponent eventually, but until you develop it, it's kind of like you don't have that extra piece, right? It is true, actually, that one of the main things to do with an extra piece in chess is to attack the opponent. That's a really good way to try to win the game. is to attack them with your extra piece. Some people play too conservatively when they're up a piece. They do the opposite thing as you. They're like, I'm up a piece. If I just make very sure to not blunder anything and try and make some occasional trades, I can eventually win from the weight of my piece. And sometimes I tell them, hey, you're not playing normally enough, right? You're playing too hesitantly, too defensively. At some point, the point of your extra piece is to attack something with it. You've got that part down, and you're right about that. You should be attacking with that piece. It's just that when that piece is on, f8 or b8 or h8, when you're trying to attack with your queen and knight, you're not actually using your extra piece yet, right? So, which was the case when you were taking that e4 pawn, basically, right? It was this situation. You're going after the pawn with your queen and knight. But in the position, you don't yet have more force than your opponent because of these ones. Yeah. All right, everybody. I think that's reasonably good. We're going to send a raid somewhere.